Picking up from the last episode, where we traced Spielberg's rise from humble TV beginnings to the undisputed box office king with hits like Jaws, E.T., Indiana Jones and Jurassic Park, the next chapter in his filmography marked a very pivotal turning point in his career.
I have friends who have won this before, and I swear I have never held one before. This is the first time I've ever had one of these in my hand.
This was the era many believe Spielberg made his most powerful and critically acclaimed films, an era defined by way deeper themes, immense historical weight, and more complex storytelling. And all of this powerful shift began with one of the most important films of his career. Schindler's List tells the true story of Oskar Schindler, a German businessman who initially profits from the war by employing cheap Jewish labor. But as he witnesses the atrocities of the Holocaust, he goes through some internal enlightenment, risking his life to save over 1,000 Jews from death by employing them in his factories, creating a powerful portrait of moral awakening in the face of unimaginable horror. This movie was deeply personal for Spielberg. As a Jewish filmmaker, he saw it as his responsibility, not just to honor the 6 million lives lost, but to preserve their memory for generations.
Schindler's List, I was always a bit outside of the experience. And I think it's because it was horrendous and troubling and deeply saddening and terrifying at times, and I think it pushed me out of it.
To preserve the film's rawness, Spielberg made several key decisions. He shot it almost entirely in black and white, used mostly handheld cameras, and filmed on location near actual Holocaust sites. Schindler's List was made on a budget of $22 million, which could be seen as modest, especially compared to Spielberg's usual blockbusters. But despite its controversial themes and black and white presentation, it became both a critical and commercial triumph. It earned over $322 million worldwide, more than 14 times its budget, making it one of the most successful historical dramas of all time, not just financially, but culturally. It was a landmark moment in Spielberg's career. It holds a near-perfect 98% critic score, with worldwide praise for Spielberg's bravery in tackling a subject that many successful directors would typically run from. It also went on to win 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Original Score, Best Adaptive Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Art Direction, Best Film Editing, and finally,
the Oscar goes to, this is a big surprise, Steven Spielberg for Schindler's List.
This was Spielberg's first Oscar win. After years of dominating the global box office, the Academy finally recognized him as a once-in-a-lifetime director with Schindler's List. By this point, Spielberg had cemented his legacy in every way imaginable, but somehow, this guy was just getting started. After the runaway success of Jurassic Park, the ever-so-greedy Hollywood powerhouse known as Universal was quick to push for a sequel. But Spielberg wasn't immediately on board. He believed the original had said all it needed to. But when Michael Crichton published The Lost World in 1995, Spielberg's interest reignited. Set 4 years after the events of Jurassic Park, the film follows Ian Malcolm as he travels to a second dinosaur-infested island, this time to rescue his girlfriend and study the creatures in their natural habitat. But things obviously spiral out of control when a greedy corporate team tries to bring the dinosaurs back to the mainland. With a hefty production budget of $73 million, The Lost World was another massive win for Spielberg and Universal, pulling in over $618 million worldwide, making it the second highest grossing film of 1997, just behind Titanic. The same director who just won the Academy Award for a haunting Holocaust drama with deep historical significance was now turning CG dinosaur monsters into $500 million profits barely 3 years later. This back-to-back success of critical acclaim and commercial dominance was nearly unheard of. Lost World currently holds a 56% critic score, which is a sharp drop from the first film, which sat at 91%. Fortunately for Spielberg, critic scores don't mean much at the bank. The Lost World was extremely profitable.
It was very successful. It wasn't as good as the first one, but it was very successful.
And with his next film, Spielberg was ready to shake things up in Hollywood once again. Coming off the towering success of The Lost World, Spielberg could have stayed in blockbuster mode, but that same year he released a film called Amistad, a historical courtroom drama that dove headfirst into one of the darkest chapters of human history, the transatlantic slave trade. It wasn't Spielberg's first time exploring black history. The Color Purple had come over a decade earlier, but Amistad went even further. Where The Color Purple dealt with race, gender, and generational trauma through an emotional and intimate lens, Amistad was raw, political, and urgent. It questioned the legal system, the founding principles of America, and the morality of a nation built on contradictions. With a production budget of around $36 million, Amistad made just $44 million worldwide. barely enough to break even when factoring in marketing and distribution. It was far from his usual blockbuster, but it didn't need to be. In 1994, Spielberg co-founded DreamWorks with David Geffen and Jeffrey Katzenberg, aiming to give filmmakers more creative freedom. Amistad was one of the studio's first releases, a signal that this new studio wasn't just about chasing profits, and for Spielberg, it was a continuation of a deeper evolution, a move toward legacy building.
This story was very relevant to me because we have African-American children.
Following Amistad, Spielberg wasted no time diving into another powerful story, one that would challenge him emotionally, creatively, and also go on to become one of the most celebrated war films of all time. Inspired by the real-life story of the Nilan brothers, Saving Private Ryan was Spielberg's effort to portray war with an unflinching realism that Hollywood had rarely attempted. The story follows Captain John Miller, played by this handsome geezer, who's ultimately tasked with leading a squad deep into enemy territory to find and bring home Private James Ryan, the last surviving brother of 4 servicemen. But the mission itself becomes a visual life lesson on duty, sacrifice, and the value of a single human life. Saving Private Ryan was produced on an estimated budget of $70 million, a substantial figure for a war film in the late 1990s. The production spared no expense recreating the chaos of World War II. From the thousands of uniforms and weapons, to the massive sets built on the beaches of Ireland, every detail added to the realism and drove up the price tag. Spielberg also invested heavily in practical effects, pyrotechnics, and large-scale battle choreography. Despite that heavy investment, the returns were staggering, as the film went on to gross over $480 million worldwide, which is nearly 7 times its production budget. It was an extremely massive win for an R-rated war drama released in the summer blockbuster season.
I kept fearing that I was making it so ugly the film would never be able to get into a movie theater in America. It would be labeled NC-17 and nobody would ever see it. And I was hoping upon hope that the historic relevance of that landing on that day, which basically saved Western democracy, Western civilization was saved that day by these kids that landed on June 6th. I was hoping that that would allow younger people to come to a movie that would certainly be rated R, but I think had more to it than just the exploitation of World War II.
Spielberg also had back-end participation in the movie, meaning he earned a percentage of the profits and not just a directing fee. As co-founder of DreamWorks, which co-distributed the film with Paramount and Universal, Spielberg's share of the back-end made Saving Private Ryan not only an artistic achievement, but one of the most financially rewarding films of his career. With a 94% approval score, critics hailed it as a phenomenal masterpiece. Saving Private Ryan took home 5 Academy Awards including Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Sound Effects Editing, and once again, Best Director for Steven Spielberg. History has remembered Saving Private Ryan as one of the most influential and respected war films ever made, not just for its visceral realism, but for how Spielberg redefined the way war was portrayed on screen. But what was about to come next was something entirely different. Artificial intelligence began as a passion project by Stanley Kubrick, inspired by a short story called Super Toys Last All Summer Long. But over time, Kubrick felt the story's emotional core needed a more sentimental touch and turned to Steven Spielberg. The two collaborated throughout the 90s, with Kubrick focusing on the world building and Spielberg helping shape the emotional tone.
Because my friend Stanley Kubrick told me a story that he was developing about artificial intelligence, and it was a story that was very close to his heart. For the first time in the 18 years I knew Stanley, he was taking me sort of into his creative confidence.
After Kubrick's death, Spielberg took over as writer and director, aiming to honor Kubrick's vision while adding his own warmth to it. Set in a climate-ravaged future, the film follows David, a robotic boy who is adopted, then abandoned, by a grieving couple. So desperate to become real so his human mother would love him again, David sets out on a surreal, heartbreaking journey through a dystopian world. This movie delves deep into the nature of human emotion, challenging the idea that a robot's feelings might be any less genuine or meaningful than those of a human. Artificial intelligence had a reported production budget of $100 million, a significant investment that reflected the film's ambitious visual effects, futuristic set designs, and the years of development it underwent. It earned just over $235 million worldwide, but after accounting for theater splits and marketing costs, it likely wasn't theatrically profitable. However, the film gradually recouped its investment through home video sales, eventually gaining recognition as a bold and thought-provoking sci-fi drama, even if it fell short of box office expectations. Artificial Intelligence currently holds a 76% critic score, earning praise for its visual ambition and storytelling. Some questioned how different the film might have been had Stanley Kubrick directed it himself. However, over time, this Spielberg version has gained more appreciation and respect. After the slow burn introspection of AI, Spielberg doubled down, returning to science fiction, but this time with a faster pulse, sharper edges, and a far more dystopian lens. Set in the year 2054, the film imagines a world where a specialized police unit called Pre-Crime uses 3 psychics to predict and prevent murders before they happen. Tom Cruise plays John Anderton, a top pre-crime officer who suddenly finds himself accused of a future murder he hasn't committed. What follows is a gripping chase across a dystopian future, as Anderton tries to clear his name and uncover the truth behind the system. Minority Report is based on a short story by Philip Dick, the same mind behind Blade Runner. Originally, the film had been in development at Fox with a different director, but once Spielberg came on board, the project quickly evolved. Spielberg brought in Tom Cruise, who was hot off Mission Impossible 2, and together they reshaped the story into a high-concept, action-packed thriller with strong philosophical undercurrents. The idea of a surveillance-heavy future definitely struck a nerve at that time, blending spectacle with unsettling questions about free will and morality.
A lot of these are ideas that we came up with based on a seminar that we had with futurists about 2.5 years ago. And they kind of painted 50 years. What would 50 years in this future of our society be like?
The film had a sizable production budget of $100 million. Spielberg reportedly deferred some of his upfront salary in exchange for a larger cut of the back end, a move he often makes when he's confident a film will deliver. Minority Report ultimately grossed over $358 million worldwide, becoming a global hit. Thanks to strong international performance and Cruise's box office draw, it earned nearly 3.5 times its production cost, easily recouping its budget and turning a healthy profit for both DreamWorks and Fox. Critics hailed it as one of the best sci-fi films of the decade, with an 89% score, praising its sharp script and visuals, along with the phenomenal performance from Tom Cruise. Spielberg's fusion of action and brainy futurism helped re-establish his dominance in a genre he helped define. But just as quickly as he reasserted his sci-fi prowess, Spielberg made a hard left turn, leaving behind futuristic tech for the harsh, unflinching reality of global warfare. Catch Me If You Can tells the incredible true story of Frank Abagnale Jr., a teenager who before his 19th birthday successfully posed as a Pan Am pilot, a doctor and a lawyer, all while cashing millions in fraudulent checks. Starring 2 of the greatest actors that Hollywood has ever exploited. The movie starts as a thrilling game of cat and mouse, but slowly reveals itself to be a story about loneliness, family, and the yearning for connection.
Amazing scam impresario played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and I think the comedy is in the cat and mouse pursuit, but the drama, which I think is substantially the basis for the movie, is about a boy who was heartbroken that his parents got divorced and wanted to go into the world and make it all up to his parents.
Production on the film moved quickly. Spielberg had originally passed on the project years earlier but circled back when scheduling delays on the terminal freed up his time. DiCaprio had already signed on, and Spielberg brought in Tom Hanks to round out the cast. Much of the filming took place in Los Angeles, with over 150 different sets used to replicate locations across the US and Europe, capturing the jet-setting feel of Frank's exploits. The movie was made on a relatively modest budget of $52 million, and it more than delivered, earning over $352 million globally. That kind of return was not just a win, it was a strategic victory. At a time when Spielberg was toggling between serious historical dramas and big-budget sci-fi, this film showed he could still tell a character-driven story and make blockbuster money. Critically, it was also well received, scoring a 96% approval score, earning praise for its breezy pacing, clever script, and standout performances. DiCaprio's role as the charming yet vulnerable Frank earned him widespread acclaim, while Tom Hanks gave the film a grounded emotional foil. It cemented a key Spielberg pattern, alternating between blockbusters and more intimate character-driven stories, all while staying box office reliable. And with that success behind him, Spielberg shifted gears once again. After dabbling in biopics and global bad guy chases, Spielberg took a softer detour with The Terminal, a film that follows Victor Navorsky, a man from the fictional country of Krakosia, who finds himself stranded at the airport when his homeland erupts into a coup and his passport becomes invalid. Victor makes the terminal his temporary home, navigating red tape, forging relationships, and quietly outwitting the airport's rigid director played by Stanley Tucci. The story was loosely inspired by the real-life case of Mehran Nasseri, who lived in a Paris airport for 18 years. But Spielberg's version is far more whimsical and humanistic, choosing to explore loneliness, kindness, and the absurdities of modern bureaucracy through a gentle lens. To build a believable world, Spielberg and his team constructed a full-size replica of a terminal set inside a hangar at Palmdale Airport in California, complete with functional escalators and working monitors.
Walk over into here and see it for the first time, it's immediately inviting. This is actually the antithesis of what most motion picture making is. It is bright, it is airy, it is cool.
The scale of the production gave Spielberg the control he needed while allowing the camera to move freely through Victor's increasingly lived-in world. The terminal was made on a moderate budget of $60 million, modest by Spielberg's blockbuster standards, but still a significant investment. It ended up grossing over $219 million worldwide, earning nearly 4 times its production cost. While it didn't shatter box office records, its profitability was important. In the grand scheme of Steven Spielberg's career, The Terminal reinforced the idea that heartfelt stories with relatable characters could still command attention and money in a market often dominated by big-budget franchises.
And so, even though Victor's stuck at an airport where you would expect the film to have no energy, the film to close in on itself and be extremely lugubrious, just the opposite is what I really intended. I wanted everybody, passengers coming, passengers going, to create a kind of gauntlet. There's one shot where Victor just stands and the camera pulls back to the very, very end of the airport. And Victor, you just lose him, he becomes invisible.
But Spielberg wouldn't stay in a light-hearted, whimsical mood for long. His next film took a sharp turn into chaos, paranoia, and global disaster. War of the Worlds centers around Ray Ferrier, a working-class father forced to protect his 2 children when alien machines erupt from underground and begin wiping out humanity. As civilization collapses around them, Ray leads his family on a desperate journey through chaos, destruction, and fear, fighting to survive in a world where nothing makes sense anymore. In early 2004, while Cruise was finishing up work on Collateral, he and Spielberg began tossing around ideas for another collaboration. They landed on War of the Worlds, a modern-day reimagining of H.G. Wells' novel, and by March the film was officially greenlit, and just 8 months later, Spielberg was already shooting. A turnaround of less than a year was practically unheard of for a visual effects-heavy blockbuster. But Spielberg wanted it that way. He believed that the urgency behind the camera would enhance the tension on screen. With a production budget of $132 million, War of the Worlds was far from cheap, but for a Spielberg and Cruise collaboration, it was actually leaner than it could have been. That's because both Spielberg and Cruise made the decision to forego their usual upfront salaries and work entirely for a percentage of the back end. This allowed the studio to funnel more money into practical effects, location shoots, and large-scale destruction.
Steve and I, we feed off each other, and so he's very inspiring to be around.
And I think in a sense we just sort of spark each other.
No, it's creative combustion.
Ultimately, this gamble paid off in a big way, because War of the Worlds went on to gross over $600 million worldwide, nearly 5 times its production cost. Even after profit participations were paid out, the film delivered strong returns for Paramount and DreamWorks, especially when home video, television rights, and merchandise were factored in later. Critics gave War of the Worlds a solid 76% rating, applauding Spielberg's direction, the grounded perspective of the film, and the brilliant performance from Tom Cruise. Despite some uneven reactions to its final act, War of the Worlds stands as one of Spielberg's most visceral blockbusters, a disaster film that prioritizes emotion over exposition. But Spielberg wasn't done exploring the dark side of humanity just yet. Later that same year, he tackled one of the most politically charged and morally complex films of his entire career. Based on a book called Vengeance written by George Jonas, Munich is widely considered Steven Spielberg's most controversial film to date.
You should make no mistake that I am not attacking Israel with this film. In no way, shape, or form am I doing that.
The movie tells the true story of Avner Kaufman, a Mossad agent tasked with leading a covert mission to assassinate the individuals responsible for the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre, where 11 Israeli athletes were killed by the Palestinian group Black September. The subject matter was highly controversial, with critics and political figures questioning both the source material and Spielberg's interpretation. Still, Spielberg pushed forward, aiming to spark conversation rather than deliver easy answers. He kept the project tightly under wraps, fast-tracking the production while simultaneously completing War of the Worlds. With a production budget of $70 million, Munich was a mid-sized film by Spielberg's standards, far more restrained than the effects-driven blockbusters he was known for. To maintain realism, Spielberg used a gritty, handheld style, drawing inspiration from 1970s spy thrillers. The goal wasn't action spectacle, it was tension, uncertainty, and moral weight. When the film hit theaters, it brought in just over $131 million worldwide. But while that figure might seem respectable on paper, it didn't translate to major profits. Once marketing and distribution costs are factored in, it's likely the film didn't double its budget and likely made little to no profit during its theatrical run. It wasn't a total box office bomb, but it wasn't a financial success either. However, many critics responded strongly to the film, giving it a 79% approval rating, with many praising Spielberg's restraint and the film's refusal to offer easy moral conclusions. While some viewers took issue with its slow pacing and moral ambiguity, Munich proved that Spielberg was a filmmaker unafraid to confront history, morality, and the uncomfortable gray areas in between the two.
And to understand why a country feels its best defense against a certain kind of violence is counter-violence. And we try to understand this as filmmakers through empathy, because that's what you do. You extend empathy in every single direction because you can't understand the human motivation without empathy.
But after back-to-back films steeped in fear, trauma, and political complexity, Spielberg decided to revisit something familiar.
Time for a break.
Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull marked the fourth installment in the iconic franchise. The movie follows Indy as he investigates some mysterious crystal skulls tied to ancient aliens and psychic phenomena. Along the way from almost nowhere, he's joined by a random sidekick named Mutt, played by Shia LaBeouf, who is later revealed to be Indy's son. After years of development hell, Spielberg, George Lucas, and Harrison Ford finally agreed on a script written by David Coep. One of the biggest obstacles was balancing the classic adventure tone with the aging of its lead star, because Harrison Ford was 64 at the time of filming. Spielberg shot most of the project on a 35mm film in an effort to stay loyal to the old-school visual style of the original trilogy. The movie had a reported production budget of $185 million, making it Spielberg's most expensive movie at the time. When you include marketing and distribution costs, the total investment from Paramount must have been extremely massive, but fortunately for Spielberg, so were the returns. By the time Kingdom of the Crystal Skull hit theaters in May of 2008, it had been 19 years since the last Indiana Jones movie. And despite fan skepticism and controversy over the plot, audiences flocked to theaters out of sheer nostalgia and curiosity, as the Crystal Skull grossed a staggering $786 million worldwide, making it the second highest grossing film of 2008, just behind The Dark Knight. But the real financial story lies in the back-end deals. Instead of taking upfront salaries, Spielberg, George Lucas, and Harrison Ford all struck profit participation deals, reportedly earning a combined cut of over $150 million once the film recouped its costs. Spielberg alone is said to have made at least $85 million from the project. With Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Spielberg closed out the 2000s with one of his biggest commercial hits, but also one of his most debated. It marked the end of what many consider the second chapter of his career, a phase defined by mature dramas, balanced with nostalgic blockbusters and long-awaited sequels. As we move into the 2010s, Spielberg entered a new era. If you're enjoying the video so far, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. Now let's move on to the next chapter in Spielberg's filmography. Steven Spielberg's The Adventures of Tintin marked his return to blockbuster adventure filmmaking, but this time with cutting-edge technology. Based on the beloved comic book series by Belgian artist Hergé, Tintin was Spielberg's first animated film, and his first time working with performance capture animation. The movie revolves around the young and fearless journalist Tintin, his loyal dog Snowy, and the perpetually drunk but lovable Captain Haddock as they chase a centuries-old treasure linked to Haddock's lineage. Spielberg had been interested in making this film since the early 1980s. It wasn't until the 2000s that the film gained momentum again, this time as a collaboration between Spielberg and Peter Jackson.
I wanted to be as close to the Hergé art. Hergé invented the books, wrote all the Tintin books. I wanted to be close to him and his art, but I still would have shot it live action back in the early 80s. And unfortunately, technology and fate were able to give me a chance to wait and be patient.
Spielberg directed the first film, while Jackson was slated to direct the sequel, although that hasn't materialized yet. The Adventures of Tintin had a production budget of around $135 million and ended up grossing $374 million at the box office. with over $296 million of that coming from international markets. It underperformed in the US but was a major hit in Europe, particularly in France, Belgium, and the UK. Given its strong global pull, home media sales, and merchandising potential, Tintin likely turned a modest profit, but not enough to immediately greenlight a sequel. Critically, the film carried a 75% approval score, as critics praised Tintin for its realistic animation, non-stop action, and the way it faithfully honored Hergé's original characters and spirit. However, some people felt the motion capture made the animation look too realistic to be a cartoon and too cartoonish to be realistic. Regardless of all of these peculiar observations, Tintin impressed critics enough to win the Golden Globe for Best Animated Feature, and just a few days later, Spielberg would take a sharp turn, trading digital swashbuckling for sweeping emotion and historical drama with Warhorse. Released just days after Tintin, Warhorse showcased a completely different side of Steven Spielberg. Gone were all the digital landscapes and motion capture. Instead, Warhorse was a sweeping emotional epic grounded in realism and told through the eyes of a horse caught in the middle of World War I. The story follows a young man named Albert and his beloved horse, Joey, and when Joey is sold to the army to serve on the front lines, their bond is tested across the brutal chaos of the war.
The difference between this movie and Ryan is there's very little blood in Warhorse, hardly any at all. And yet there are intense scenes of combat, but without the kind of graphic.
It was produced on a relatively modest budget of $66 million. This was a deliberate decision, as the film didn't rely on heavy visual effects or large-scale spectacle. Despite being a historical war drama, a genre that rarely dominates the global box office, Warhorse performed moderately well, earning $177 million worldwide. But once you factor in the costs of marketing and distribution, which likely added another $40 to $50 million, the profit margins shrink significantly. While it wasn't a major financial hit, it was still a respectable showing for a prestige drama, especially one without major stars or franchise appeal, and proved that there was still a theatrical audience for emotionally driven historical epic. Right after this, Spielberg tackled another historical film, and that, my dear viewers, leads us to my least favorite Spielberg movie of all time.
Oh my God, bro.
I wish I had some deep philosophical filmmaker-level analysis to explain why I detest this movie. I understand its rich historical significance and blah blah blah, but it's just extremely unbearably boring and drags on more than any other film in Spielberg's catalog. Regardless, let's quickly get into it and get it over with. Lincoln is a super slow-paced political drama that focuses on the final months of Abraham Lincoln's presidency, specifically his push to pass the 13th Amendment and abolish slavery before the Civil War ended. Rather than being a sweeping biopic, the film zooms in on the backroom deals, debates, and the moral compromises Lincoln navigated as he tried to shape the future of the nation. The movie was made on a budget of $65 million, with relatively minimal marketing compared to Spielberg's blockbuster work. It grossed $275 million worldwide, an impressive haul for a slow, dialogue-driven historical drama. From a financial standpoint, Lincoln was a quiet success, and unlike a few skeptics, the general consensus and critics loved Lincoln, bestowing it with an 89% approval rating. It also went on to win 2 Oscars, including Best Actor for Daniel Day-Lewis, and also Best Production Design. Even if I personally had to fight to stay awake throughout this movie, many people consider it to be one of Spielberg's most accurately depicted historical flicks. But after all the political dialogue and historical drama, Spielberg shifted gears once more. At the height of the Cold War, an American pilot is captured by the Soviets, and a Russian spy is arrested in Brooklyn. James Donovan, a principled lawyer, is asked to defend the spy in court, a move that makes him a national outcast. But when the US sees a chance to negotiate a prisoner swap, Donovan finds himself in the middle of a tense, unofficial mission in divided Berlin, where he must broker a deal that could change the course of international diplomacy. This movie was born from Spielberg's fascination with the Cold War's quieter moments, the kind that shaped world history not through violence but through negotiation, back-channel conversations, and ethical compromises.
What first caught my attention was just the bizarre series of events that led up to this possible spy swap.
Spielberg tapped this adorable pumpkin for the lead role, his 4th time working with him, because he saw Donovan as the kind of hero that Tom Hanks plays naturally. Bridge of Spies went on to gross over $165 million worldwide, bringing back more than 4 times its production budget, making it a clear financial success. For a mature dialogue-heavy Cold War drama with no explosions or franchise branding, these numbers were considered a success, especially with older audiences. 91% critic score, as many hailed the film's understated tension and its refusal to sensationalize the Cold War. Tom Hanks was once again praised for anchoring the film, but it was Mark Rylance who quietly stole the show. His subtle and restrained portrayal of Rudolph Abel earned widespread acclaim, ultimately winning him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. Bridge of Spies may not be Spielberg's flashiest work, but it proved his continued mastery of detailed, character-driven storytelling. And from a grounded Cold War negotiation, Spielberg made yet another dramatic shift. In London, a young orphan named Sophie is taken by a big friendly giant who, unlike his man-eating neighbors, collects and delivers good dreams to children. When the other giants threaten humanity, Sophie and the giant team up with the Queen of England to stop them.
A lot of BFG is about dream catching. BFG and Sophie go off to an actual place where you can actually catch a dream, mix a dream, and then design the dream to then blow through a long trumpet into the windows of young children so they can so they can be able to adopt those dreams themselves.
The BFG carried a massive $140 million production budget, much of it going into Spielberg's collaboration with Weta Digital, the intricate motion capture work for Mark Rylance, and the sweeping visual effects that brought Giant Country to life. The movie went on to earn a little over $195 million at the global box office, which wasn't enough to cover its full costs once marketing expenses and theater cuts were factored in. In the end, the film is estimated to have lost between $70 to $90 million. Several factors worked against it, including the absence of built-in franchise appeal, a slow old-fashioned tone that struggled to connect with younger audiences, and a release date that put it up against heavy competition like Finding Dory and The Legend of Tarzan. For all its heart and visual wonder, the BFG became one of Spielberg's rare box office misfires. Critically, the BFG fared much better than it did financially. It currently holds a 74% critic score, with reviewers praising its warmth, visual inventiveness, and the tender chemistry between Sophie and Mark Rylance's motion-captured giant. It remains a tender, visually enchanting chapter in Spielberg's career, one that found its fans, even if it never found a broad audience. After the whimsical fantasy, Spielberg pivoted back to real-world storytelling. Based on real events, The Post tells the story of one of the most pivotal moments in American journalism. In the early 1970s, The Washington Post found itself at the center of a historic showdown. Publisher Katharine Graham and editor Ben Bradley came into possession of the Pentagon Papers, a top-secret government documents revealing decades of U.S. deception about the Vietnam War, when debates over the press and government transparency were especially heated.
Ike Kennedy, Johnson, they violated the Geneva Convention. They lied to Congress and they lied to the public. They knew we couldn't win and still sent boys to die.
The Post had a production budget of around $50 million, which went toward meticulously recreating the early 1970s setting. At the box office, The Post earned over $193 million worldwide, a strong showing for a political drama with no major franchise backing. This revenue, combined with the controlled production budget, made The Post a clear financial success, proving that well-crafted issue-driven films can still draw significant attention in today's blockbuster-dominated market.
He is so alive to the possibility of how a scene lives and how it contributes to the narrative of the whole piece. When I first came in, I knocked over a chair by mistake, and Steven said, "That's great, do that again," every time.
After this powerful exploration of journalism and political courage, Spielberg took a bold turn into one of my favorite films he's made in recent years. Ready Player One is an adaptation of Ernest Cline's best-selling novel, a love letter to video games, movies, and music from that era. Set in 2045, Ready Player One takes us into the Oasis, a sprawling virtual reality universe where people escape the hardships of the real world. When the Oasis creator dies, he leaves behind a series of complicated, unnecessary puzzles, promising his vast fortune and control of the virtual world to whoever can solve them first. Wade Watts, a young, resourceful gamer, teams up with friends to compete against powerful corporate forces in a high-stakes race that blends adventure with the fight for freedom. The story also grapples with the impact of technology and artificial intelligence on society. The Oasis itself, is a vast AI-driven universe, reflecting both the promise and the potential pitfalls of advanced technology. With a hefty budget of around $175 million, production for the film was a massive undertaking, combining live action with extensive CGI and motion capture. When it finally hit the theaters, Ready Player One was a major financial success, grossing over $600 million worldwide. This strong return underscored Spielberg's continued ability to deliver blockbuster hits well into the new decade. Beyond the numbers, the film marked an important moment in Spielberg's career, showing that even after decades in the industry, he could still innovate and embrace the future of filmmaking.
We don't have to walk 5 feet to leave our world. We just have to put something over our eyes, and we are suddenly thrust into a wonderful world of someone's imagination.
Ready Player One received generally positive reviews, holding a critic approval rating of 71%. Critics praised the adaptation, the storytelling, and the way the characters translated visually. On the other hand, a few people felt the story was a bit light and leaned too heavily on pop culture callbacks. Regardless, this movie reaffirmed Spielberg's relevance in a rapidly changing Hollywood landscape, bridging generations of moviegoers with a story that celebrates both nostalgia and forward-looking imagination. Following the crazy tech-fueled adventure of Ready Player One, Spielberg turned his attention to a classic story reimagined for a new generation. Originally announced in the early 2010s, Spielberg took on the challenge of remaking one of America's most beloved musicals. Collaborating with a new creative team, including screenwriter Tony Kushner, the film aimed to honor the original, while giving voice to the characters' cultural backgrounds with more authenticity and depth.
This is very important, especially with West Side Story, that we have to get it right. It's not that other productions didn't get it right in their own way, but I just did not want to make this reimagining without complete representation, authentic representation from the entire Latinx community, and that was the most important thing. I know the other most important thing for me was a lot of Spanish, but don't subtitle it.
Yeah. Who does that?
The story centers on two rival street gangs, the Jets, a group of white working-class youths, and the Sharks, Puerto Rican immigrants struggling to find their place. We follow Tony, a former member of the Jets gang, and Maria, the sister of the Sharks leader, as they fall in love despite their group's violent rivalry. The romance between these two lovebirds sparked tension between the gangs, which obviously leads to tragic consequences. West Side Story had a production budget estimated around $100 million, making it one of Spielberg's more expensive projects. The costs reflected the film's ambitious scope, elaborate period sets recreating 1950s New York, extensive location shoots, and a large cast including both established stars and newcomers. Additionally, the film's intricate choreography and musical numbers required significant rehearsal time and technical resources to bring them to life authentically. Unfortunately, West Side Story faced an incredibly challenging release environment due to the pandemic. Theaters were operating at limited capacity worldwide, and many audiences remained hesitant about returning to cinemas. As a result, the film grossed $76 million worldwide, well below its production costs. When factoring in marketing expenses and distribution fees, the movie suffered a significant financial loss. Despite the critical acclaim and award recognition, West Side Story was a clear commercial disappointment, an example of how even established filmmakers like Spielberg were not immune to the pandemic's devastating impact on the film industry. And now we arrive at the last film in Spielberg's very extensive filmography, a deeply personal film that tells Spielberg's own life story but never received the right glory. The Fabelmans is a semi-autobiographical drama that traces the coming-of-age story of a young boy named Sammy Fabelman, growing up in post-war America. Through Sammy's eyes, we experience the joys and struggles of family life, his discovery of a passion for filmmaking, and the complex dynamics that shape his understanding of identity, creativity, and loss. The movie offers a deeply personal look at Spielberg's own early years and the influences that inspired his legendary career. Spielberg co-wrote and directed The Fabelmans as a heartfelt tribute to his family and the formative moments that shaped his path. The production was handled with great care to preserve authenticity, casting actors who could capture the nuances of his youth and family relationships. It stands as a unique blend of memoir and cinematic storytelling, a rare glimpse into the mind of one of Hollywood's greatest filmmakers. With a production budget estimated around $40 million, The Fabelmans was a modestly budgeted film by Spielberg standards. Despite critical praise and award buzz, it grossed just under $45 million worldwide. barely breaking even when marketing and distribution costs were factored in. This underperformance at the box office reinforced the harsh reality that even the most personal and critically acclaimed films don't always translate to commercial success. As we've seen through this video, that Spielberg's journey hasn't been without its challenges. Alongside his worldwide critical acclaim, countless awards, soaring blockbusters and record-breaking numbers, there have also been some quieter moments and films that didn't resonate as strongly at the box office or with critics. Yet, even in all of those lows, Spielberg's commitment to storytelling and his craft never wavered. Each project adds a unique layer to his vast and varied filmography, showing a restless creative spirit always willing to take risks and explore new territory.
You have to, every day of your lives, be ready to hear what whispers in your ear. It very rarely shouts. And if you can listen to the whisper, and if it tickles your heart, and it's something you think you want to do for the rest of your life, then that is going to be what you do for the rest of your life, and we will benefit from everything you do. Thank you very much.
Well, that's all for today's episode. Thanks for joining me on this extensive journey through the catalog of one of my favorite filmmakers. Let me know in the comments what your favorite Spielberg film is, and what director or franchise you'd like to see covered next. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching.